Hey guys, this is part 2 of the story involving Jeff and the Library Club. Part 1 was done by Artificial DM. I will leave a link in the description and in the YouTube card on the top right. So make sure you go check out part 1 so you have a little bit more context to this. But without further ado, let's get into it. So for some quick clarifications and context. For me to have a public D&D club at this library, I had to follow the library policies, which meant I couldn't kick people out unless they were being a public disturbance. So I was never able to actually consider that option. Talking and communication usually should be first, and I wasn't that great about it during the first parts of this group. I like to think this group really helped me be less of a pushover and talk things out. Beyond that, let's rant and discuss about Jeff. Jeff knew of my club by another player's boyfriend, as the two were co-workers. However, Jeff has, or had, a writer's club here, so I didn't really understand why he didn't hear of it before. He came to one of the beginning sessions where we were all making characters, and learning the basics of the game before we hopped into the actual game. I asked everyone about their experience with D&D, and Jeff stated that he played in college. I didn't know him, so I didn't have any reason to doubt or ask him to elaborate. While we were making our character sheets, I put up a video for us to follow, while I paused and helped people individually. I asked if he needed help, and he said no. I never checked his sheet, since he seemed so confident he was doing it right. He ended up making a human cleric with the acolyte background. We continued to play, and instances came up where the players either needed to pay for rooms and food, or supplies, etc. In most cases, Jeff in character stated,
"Put it on my tab,"
or something along those lines. It doesn't have to make the most sense, but I let it slide. It happened a few more times, and I decided to recheck his background in my PHB since it didn't seem like the Acolyte background would allow this much starting gold. Well, it didn't. He had definitely gone over it. I paused the roleplay so I could ask Jeff if he is keeping track of his gold.
"We're keeping track of gold?"
The other players look at him, as do I. Another player states that we are keeping gold. Keep in mind, Jeff has, at this point, seen other players try to convert money and budget things so they wouldn't starve. I tell Jeff what gold he would have started with, but he technically doesn't have it from the tabs he has had. So he is basically broke and no longer tries to pay for anything else. Of course, this is a red flag for me, since the other players seem to be following the rules and keeping track of what they need. I brush it under the rug, however, as he enjoys role-playing. However, another flag comes up during combat. He struggles with it. Being a cleric, he knows that he is a healer, so when one of the players gets hurt, he goes up to them and asks to heal them. I ask how he does that.
"I'm a cleric, right?
Yes.
Can't I just heal her?"
I explain to him to use one of the spells that we discussed about during character creation, which he did look over them, and I tried to explain spell slots and cantrips to him, which took a long time, and it seemed to be going over his head. So we took a break from combat, as I looked up the spell, and we managed to heal her. After that, he usually tried to avoid combat, so he could roleplay, or try to have me focus on him. Of course, this ruined the flow of combat, and I was unsure on how to deal with this, as I had never had a player avoid combat. Over time, I usually just kept track of how far he can go, and only allow 1 or 2 sentences, as each round is 6 seconds, since that's all his character wanted to do. It made balancing combat more tedious, as I usually had to count him out as a healer and just another party member every time. It was also around this time I came back from the bathroom, and I overheard one of the players asking Jeff what his experiences from college were like. It was something along the lines of,
It was different. We all sat in chairs in a circle. Only the DM had papers and dice that he used. We just talked about what we did.
This kind of explained a lot of his behaviors and made me a little angry. I understand that that was what your experience for D&D was, but look at the work everyone else was putting in and the opportunities you have to improve, as well as playing actual D&D. No hate to those who have their own way of playing, but when someone says D&D, I would think something from the WOTC or official rulings than a bunch of college guys sitting in a circle without a table. By this time, our club had grown by several members. I asked them to come early or take time out of a session, which usually never happened, so it could help with character creation or help catch them up on the world. I usually ended up having to cancel a campaign session so it could help new players make characters, which in retrospect, I probably should have stayed to what I said, but most of these people were beginners, and I didn't want it to seem like I was gatekeeping, or to make their first D&D experiences bad. However, we were getting close to a level up, so I let everyone know that the next session we would be spending the first portion leveling up, which we usually did. But I said I would be coming around to make sure we are leveling up correctly. This was mostly for Jeff, as I learned that, hey, I should probably check my player sheets, but also to aid the beginners, since anyone who joined would be starting at a 3 to 5 level, which would be a lot for a beginner. The next session came, and I start going around to help, as did a veteran player, John, who recently joined. I made my way to Jeff, who was on his phone. This was a progressively reoccurring habit, especially when he wasn't the focus during roleplay or combat. It took a moment to get his attention, but I started going over his sheet. Now, I don't really like having that DM is the teacher and the player is a student sort of dynamic, but that's what it felt like with this man. To further show my uncertainty of the situation, Jeff was most likely 25 to 30-ish. I had never asked his age, but I was 18 at the time. This was the first time I had to sit down with an adult and teach them something, besides how to open a new Chrome tab. I didn't feel good, as I really felt like a teacher trying to catch a child up on absent work that he was there for. Now, before I state what was wrong on a sheet, keep in mind that we were between level 3 and 5 by milestones. I usually did a milestone every few weeks, so we are looking at least 3 to 4 months of this campaign. People at the table were usually learning the more detailed rules as we went on, and generally progressing in their skills as players. When I looked over his sheet, I felt so disappointed and exhausted. For his spells, he had class features written down. His HP was still for level 1, still had no track of money, inventory was beginner equipment, and a flask he had purchased later on, and probably more that I can't remember. I took a moment looking over everything, taking in what I needed to critique on, as well as not cry. I have severe social anxiety and hard control over my emotions, and with the context of the situation, it was really hard to keep it cool. All in all, I spent most of my time with Jeff, as we practically are making the character from scratch to then level up. I also ensure that we go up by each level, so he fully understands how the leveling up system works. I let him know of a free spellbook app he can use on his phone, but he seems to dismiss that as he can write them down. Players even offer to handwrite him custom spell cards for him, but he ensures them that he can write them down on his own. Shocker, he never wrote them down. But after that, he had an up-to-date sheet, with me having to re-explain various rules. I felt more at ease from the one-on-one with him, and we continued on. But he still continued to avoid combat. I ended up not confronting him about it, since after every session, he always came to me trying to hug, which I didn't care for, and elaborate how much fun he had. Also, as a side rant, after almost every meeting, he would advertise for his book club, but in that way where it isn't advertising.
Oh, last week at book club, this really funny thing happened. You guys should come.
It mostly annoyed us, and I really wish I actually had the guts to ask him to stop it. But it was always after the technical ending time, so I never bothered. I also, at this point, had given him less spotlight time since he tried to hog it. He usually only got it with the 15 seconds during combat, so I let him be since everyone else seemed to be having fun while he did his own thing. But since he still refused to have his cleric actually assist in combat, I struggled with balancing since there was no other healers. So as such, I decided to gift them potions. I can't remember how. All I remember is that I gave them a bag full of them to use since they were treading some monstrous lands. The potions were handed to the bard, who is very good as the group's treasurer and inventory keeper. For whatever reason, they make the logical decision to let the cleric have them. Which, yeah, he's the healer, but had no one noticed how he had done absolutely nothing for combat? But I didn't say this. I let the horror ensue as I watched him sit back, not touching his sheet, and him not putting down a bag of healing in his inventory. During the same session, they came along an NPC who knew the cleric. They were war buddies. The cleric didn't seem to remember him at first, but played along as if he did. As I listened to some other players ask the NPC for guidance to the next town, I see Jeff get the realization.
Oh yeah, I do know this guy, that I emphasize in my backstory.
Time passes, and the NPC agreed to guide the group for free as Jeff's character saved him, and this would be his favor. While the party took turns sleeping on the cart, Jeff was up for watch, and the NPC was driving. He also had a female elf partner who he had switched occasionally to drive with. Since Jeff's character felt so bad about him not getting any payment, he hands off the potions to this NPC. I try to have the NPC refuse, but Jeff wanted to roll persuasion. He rolled low and he denied it. Jeff continued to bother him until I made the NPC cave in, as I had as well. Jeff was satisfied with this for whatever reason. Out of game, people kept quiet as they knew they didn't see what happened. After game is when people asked Jeff why he did that.
He deserves it.
Of course, there was an argument afterwards, but I let the players know not to worry about it as I just would give them another bag of potions when they got to the next town. This time, no one let Jeff touch it. After that is when people started opening up their thoughts on Jeff's gameplay. Especially John, who knew that this was bullcrap. I explained the library policy to John, and let him know what I've done for Jeff already. And I told him that I would try to talk to him over text. However, he never got back to me. When the next session came, and I let people know that I plan to talk with Jeff before we start, I somehow forgot to mention that Jeff is always late. Exactly by 30 minutes. I can't tell you how many times before John came that I tried to get people to start on time.
Let's wait for Jeff. He'll be here soon.
Etc. Thankfully, John set the example of texting me when he would be late, and be there about 5 to 10 minutes early, and help me start on time with roleplay. Or jumping back into gameplay, because, hey, it's nice to socialize about our weeks, but we have to put away one day for 2 to 3 hours to play D&D, and that's what I wanted. Besides my sidetrack, he is later than usual this time, and I ask him if we could talk outside for a bit. I ask him if he got my text, and he said that he did, but he was busy. He tried to make a long excuse, and I said, "It's okay. Life gets in the way. But we can talk now." And I asked him about his patron.
Like, my god?
Yes. The god you picked out so long ago. He was quiet, and I gave a soft sigh. To summarize, I let him know that he is high enough level for his god to notice his actions that aren't very good. This isn't the Roman Catholic god, but a god that can and will take your powers. I liked to think that this speech helped, and it seemed to for a few sessions. But eventually he avoided combat once more and tried to persuade his way out of combat as much as possible. Moreover, it's not like taking away his powers would actually matter, considering he never used them. Anyway, there was one time he could not avoid combat. They were on a boat being attacked by a sea creature. While everyone on the top deck was struggling, he wanted to investigate the bottom of the boat. Over several turns, he managed his way down since the crew members of the ship were too busy trying to fend off a beast, while he was calmly investigating the ship. I really wish that combat didn't take so long for him, but it was one of the longest fights. It took up 2 full sessions. He ended up snooping around and finding all sorts of things he shouldn't have access to, such as a coffin, which he opened up to disturb a wrapped dead body, and of course, all his teammates saw him leave. He managed to come back, and he wanted to punch the sea monster. I made him make an improvised attack roll, and I swear to the dice gods, they let him roll just high enough to hit the monster, along with just enough damage to die. It only had 2 HP. John is, of course, angry, since everyone was cheering on the cleric. Maybe everyone was happy that he finally actually did something combat-related. But John and I just looked at each other, shaking our heads. Over time, our first campaign was coming to an end, and I had to split the groups, as I had 12 people join since I wasn't allowed to say no to people. I also wasn't allowed to say no to people wanting to join both groups, but I didn't tell them this. So I emphasized what the point of the splitting was. Thankfully, another player convinced John to join only one group, since everyone else was. The second campaign, John asked if he could help Jeff make his sheet. I wondered why, until John let me know that he would help Jeff make the weakest ranger. The one that sucks, and I can't be bothered to actually remember it right now. Now, you would think that if you did even the slightest research, or even read the book for once, you would know that this is a bad class. Jeff never questioned it. I again didn't check everyone's sheets, since I trusted that John had it handled and everyone was confident in making their sheet, since we had been playing for about 10 months now. In-game, Jeff's character basically bullies John's character. He gets most of the other characters to team up against him. No matter what John's character did, the party hated it. After one particularly bad session where John's character punched Jeff's, over not hunting a highly wanted dwarf, since they were weak and had to prioritize their current mission, John took me aside after a session to let me know he's leaving. I completely understood, but I was still distraught. My time as a DM worsened when John left. Even though he didn't want to be the player leader, he was. And we all technically struggled when he was gone, since he had most ideas, and led the group whether the characters wanted it or not, since the players ended up seeing him as the leader. I generally had to throw one thing after the next in front of them, since otherwise they would sit inside their home or argue in front of the game board of what to do next. As the DM, I cannot hold my players' hands, but all in all, it was a difficult time to keep any progress going with them. People still said that they were having fun, but I wasn't, as the time went on, as I struggled to keep them entertained. Eventually, the club ended due to construction. I took Jeff's group to another player's house since it was the best option we had, and things only got worse. Eventually, it came to one night where I was thinking about ending the group, and this is when Jeff came to me before I left.
Is there anything I can do to improve?
This question angered me. After a night of yelling, me having an anxiety attack, and you lounging in a separate chair on your phone missing several turns of combat, this is what was concerning you. I asked for his character sheet to look over, and I know that John was trying his best, but for the entire 3-hour session we spent prepping for the new campaign, all I wanted to do was rip that sheet. However, my empathetic pushover self took the benefit of the doubt, and I asked him for his sheet. He was very hesitant, but I told him that I would correct it, and we would go over it next time. I went over his sheet, and I still have it, and he didn't have most of his features and traits. His subclass was his background. He still wasn't keeping track of currency. He still wasn't keeping track of experience, which I decided to use experience this time, to encourage them to do more than just wait for a level up. And after I handed him a new sheet with nicely printed spell cards, I talked to my boyfriend that night, and he knocked the sense into me to just leave as the group was overall toxic, and I hadn't been having fun with them for at least 12 sessions. I feel like I wasted my time remaking a sheet, but I at least have the satisfaction that he's never getting it back. Not like he would use it anyway. Thanks for reading, if you did. I know that this is super long, but these posts are giving me some relief of what I had to deal with in that club. I still miss the good times though, but I'm unsure if I'll ever want to do a club or similar thing again. But in any case, guys, that's the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have a story that you'd like me to narrate, let me know. And as always, thanks for watching, and have a good one.